Hello, everyone. My name is Olivia Reed. I'm the oldest sister in my family, and I serve in the United States Navy. I've spent most of my adult life in uniform learning discipline responsibility and how to hold a line when things get hard. But the hardest lines I've ever had to draw weren't in the military. They were in my own family. I was home on leave for exactly 4 days. Not a minute more than what the Navy approved. Not a minute less than what my schedule could spare. When your life runs on duty rotations and deployment calendars, you stop thinking in weeks or months. Everything becomes windows. This one just happened to line up with my sister's 35th birthday. Alexis insisted on a party. Not a quiet dinner, not cake with family. A full backyard event at her house, catered food string lights, rented bar, and enough people I didn't recognize to fill a wedding reception. I arrived in a simple navy blue dress, flat shoes, hair pulled back the way it always is when I'm off base, but still on instinct. She greeted me with a quick hug that felt more like a formality than affection. "You made it," she said, scanning me from head to toe. "Wow. Still dressing like you're on duty, huh?" I smiled because that's what you do when you're the older sister, and the guest list includes people who think manners are optional. I handed her the gift bag. Medium-sized, wrapped carefully. No brand logos, no bow meant to impress strangers. She took it from me with one hand, while holding a champagne flute in the other. "Everyone," she announced, raising her voice, just enough to pull attention. My sister finally brought a present. A few people laughed. I didn't recognize most of them. Investors, friends of friends, neighbors she barely tolerated. I recognized the look on Alexis's face, though. I'd seen it my whole life, the look that said she was already bored. She opened the bag slowly, dramatically, like she was hosting a game show. Tissue paper came out first, then the box. She lifted the lid. For half a second, her expression froze. Inside was the compass, old brass. Polished but not flashy. The glass crystal had been replaced. The markings were clean and steady. It was the same compass our grandmother carried when she immigrated. The same one she kept wrapped in cloth in her bedside drawer. The one she used to show us when we were kids, telling us it would always point us home. I restored it over 3 months. Not rushed, not outsourced. I made sure every piece was right. Alexis stared at it like it was an object she couldn't place in a catalog. "This is it?" she asked. I nodded. It was Grandma's. She tilted her head and laughed. Not politely, not nervously. A real laugh. "Oh my God," she said, holding it up so people could see. "You're serious!" A few guests leaned in. Someone murmured, "Is it antique?" Another asked if it was from a museum. Alexis didn't answer them. She looked straight at me. "This is cheap trash," she said. Like, actually worthless. There it was. Not a joke. Not a misunderstanding. Just the sentence dropped clean and sharp. I didn't speak. I didn't move. She shrugged, turned, and walked 3 steps to the outdoor trash can by the bar. Without breaking stride, she tossed the compass inside. It landed with a dull sound against plastic cups and napkins, right in front of everyone. The party noise dipped, then resumed. Music turned back up. Someone clapped, thinking it was part of a bit. Alexis smiled like she'd just told a great story. "Okay," she said, lifting her glass again. "Drinks, anyone?" I stood there looking at the trash can. I could still see the edge of the box through the liner. I didn't argue. That's the part people always get wrong later. They assume there was a scene. Raised voices, tears, that I demanded an apology or made a speech about respect. I didn't. I stayed where I was, calm, still. The same way you stay when you're waiting for instructions you know aren't coming. Someone next to me whispered, "That was harsh." Another person said, "Military people are so serious." She probably didn't mean it. Alexis floated past again, already onto the next conversation. She was glowing. Expensive dress, perfect hair. The house behind her looked like it belonged in a magazine. The car in the driveway was newer than anything I'd ever owned. "You should really loosen up," she said as she passed. "It's a party." I looked at her and nodded once. Her husband Ethan caught my eye from across the yard. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He looked tired in a way I recognized. The kind of tired that doesn't come from long days, but from pretending too long. I didn't retrieve this gift. Not then. Not while people were watching. I took a bottle of water from the cooler, thanked the host out of habit, and walked toward the side gate. Alexis didn't notice me leaving. On the drive back to my hotel, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't replay the moment in my head either. That comes later when you let it. Right then my mind did what it's trained to do. It organized facts. 5 years. That's how long it had been since our parents died. 5 years since everything they built was placed into a family trust with my name on the documents and my signature on the oversight. 5 years of monthly transfers, insurance payments, mortgage coverage, quiet bailouts, and careful compliance, so nothing ever touched my uniform. Alexis had never asked where the money came from. She never needed to. It had always been there, reliable, invisible, and I had always been silent. At the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed and took off my shoes. I set my phone on the nightstand and checked the time. 9:47 p.m. There was a message from my command reminding me of a briefing the following week. Another from an old shipmate joking about my vacation. Nothing from Alexis. I opened my email and stared at the inbox without reading anything. Then I closed it. I thought about the way the compass hit the bottom of the trash can, the sound it made, the certainty in her voice when she said worthless, the ease with which she said it, like she was stating a fact everyone should already know. I didn't feel angry, not yet. What I felt was something colder, clearer. There are moments when you realize kindness has crossed into permission, when support turns into expectation, when silence stops being neutral and starts doing damage. I stood up, went to the desk, and pulled out my notebook. The one I travel with, plain cover, no decorations. I wrote one line, and then I closed it, turned off the light, and lay back without setting an alarm, knowing the morning would come, whether I invited it or not. I woke before the alarm, the room still dark, and reached for the notebook on the desk without turning on the light. The habit comes from years of early watches and quiet cabins. When something needs to be faced, you don't wait for the day to warm up. You sit with it while it's still sharp. I flipped the notebook open, scanned the single line I'd written, then closed it again. There was nothing to add. Not yet. Alexis's life looked effortless from the outside. That was always the point. By mid-morning, I was driving through her neighborhood again, this time in daylight. Wide streets, trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes. The kind of place people move to when they want the world to think they've arrived. Her house sat near the corner, white siding, clean lines, fresh paint. The kind of house that photographs well from every angle. I parked down the block and walked, not to her door, just past it. I wanted to see the place without being invited inside. Alexis liked to say she built everything herself. She told that story often, at dinner parties, on social media, to anyone who asked what she did for a living. She owned a boutique downtown, curated brands, hosted pop-up events, talked about community and growth like those words were currency. She called it hustle. I called it expensive. Her boutique had opened 3 months after our parents' funeral. No savings, no business plan anyone had shown me. Just a lease, inventory orders, and confidence. At the time, I told myself it was grief. People make bold decisions when the ground shifts under them. I signed off on the initial support through the trust without hesitation. That was the first check. The second came when the first month's sales didn't cover payroll, then another for insurance, then rent, then a shortfall that needed temporary help. Temporary has a way of becoming permanent when no one says otherwise. I had said nothing. I'd structured everything the way my advisors recommended. Arm's length, clean records, monthly reports, no cash, no favors. Every transfer logged, justified, approved. I never touched the money directly. I never stepped into her business. I never corrected her when she talked about success like it was a personality trait. When she bought the house, the trust covered the down payment through a shell LLC. When she leased the car, the trust guaranteed it. When her kids needed private school deposits, the trust paid the invoices. When she wanted to donate to a charity gala, the trust wrote the check. Alexis thanked the room. She never thanked me. She liked to joke that I was bad with money, that the Navy paid in pride instead of dollars. She'd say it with a smile like it was harmless. You don't need much, she'd tell me. You're simple. Simple was her favorite word for me. It meant predictable. It meant quiet. It meant she didn't have to look too closely. At lunch, I sat in my car with a sandwich and watched her boutique through the window across the street. It was open, Lights on. A staff member rearranged a display that had already been rearranged 3 times since I arrived. 2 customers walked in. 1 walked out empty-handed. Alexis emerged a few minutes later, phone pressed to her ear, laughing too loudly. She paced the sidewalk, like someone performing confidence for an audience that might vanish if she stopped moving. I checked my watch. She was late for something. She was always late for things she didn't want to deal with. When she hung up, she leaned against the window and scrolled. Her reflection merged with the mannequins behind the glass. Perfect posture, perfect angles, no cracks. I thought about the way she'd tossed the compass, the lack of hesitation, the assumption that whatever she didn't value didn't matter. That assumption had been fed for years. I finished my lunch and drove back to the hotel. I changed into workout clothes and ran until my legs burned the way I do when my mind starts cataloging mistakes. Physical limits are easier to manage than moral ones. You push, you breathe, you stop when it's time. In the shower, I replayed a single moment, not the trash can, the look on Ethan's face. He hadn't said anything. He hadn't needed to. He looked like a man who knew exactly where the money came from and exactly how long it had been coming. A man who'd chosen quiet over conflict for reasons that probably felt noble at first. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Alexis. "Did you seriously leave without saying goodbye?" I stared at it for a second, then set the phone down. Another message followed. "You could have at least taken a joke." A third. "People were asking why you were so weird about the gift." I picked up the phone, typed a response, then erased it. Typed again. Erased again. I didn't owe her an explanation. That was a boundary I'd blurred too many times already. Instead, I opened my email and pulled up the latest monthly report from the trust. The numbers were familiar, predictable. The kind of predictability that feels safe until you realize it's enabling something rotten. The boutique had lost money again. Not dramatically, just enough to be concerning. Payroll covered, rent paid. Inventory reordered. The same pattern month after month. The house payment cleared that morning. The car lease would clear tomorrow. The school tuition draft was scheduled for Friday. All of it would go through unless someone stopped it. I closed the report and sat back. The room was quiet. Too quiet for a decision that big. I needed air. I needed movement. I drove toward the coast windows, down salt in the air. There's something about being near water that strips away excuses. You either respect it or you don't. The ocean doesn't negotiate. I pulled into a public overlook and stood by the rail. Families took photos. Couples argued quietly about angles and lighting. A kid dropped an ice cream cone and cried like it was the end of the world. Life kept moving. My phone rang. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. I answered without greeting. "I'm sorry about last night," he said. No preamble, no defense. "It wasn't your doing," I replied. "I know," he said, "but it wasn't right." We stood in silence for a few seconds, the wind filling the gap. "She didn't mean it," he added, then stopped himself. "Actually, that's not true. She meant it. She just didn't think it mattered." I watched the waves break and recede. "She's under a lot of pressure," he continued. "The business. Keeping up appearances. It's been hard." "It's always been hard," I said. "Pressure doesn't create character. It reveals it." He exhaled slowly. "I figured you'd say that." "I'm not angry," I told him. "I'm clear." That was the word that finally fit. We ended the call without promises or plans. Just an understanding that something had shifted, whether anyone admitted it or not. As the sun dipped lower, I turned back toward the car. The notebook sat on the passenger seat where I'd left it that morning. I picked it up, opened to a fresh page, and wrote one sentence. Then I closed it, placed it in the glove compartment, and started the engine already moving with the kind of certainty that doesn't need permission. I pulled into the hotel parking lot just as the sky went flat and gray, the kind of evening that feels unfinished, and sat in the car with the engine running longer than necessary. My phone buzzed again before I turned it off. This time it wasn't Alexis. It was a voicemail notification from an unknown number. I listened to it standing by the elevator, the carpet muffling my footsteps, my uniform jacket folded over my arm. "Ms. Mercer," a man said, voice smooth, practiced. "This is Alan Rothman. I represent your sister, Alexis Mercer. I'm reaching out regarding some concerns she has about undisclosed family assets and potential irregularities tied to your parents' estate." I didn't move. "She believes there may have been financial decisions made without her knowledge." he continued, and she's asked me to explore her legal options. At this stage, we're hoping to resolve things informally. The elevator doors opened and closed. I didn't get on. I replayed the message twice more, listening for tone instead of words. There was no confusion in it. No curiosity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was positioning. In my room, I set my jacket on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't call him back. I didn't need to. The message had already done its job. Alexis hadn't just been cruel at the party. She decided I was a problem to be managed. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 5 years, I'd handled everything quietly to keep her stable. The moment she felt slighted, she reached for a lawyer. I checked the time, 8:12 p.m. In the Navy, you learn early that there are lines you don't cross, even when you're angry. Especially when you're angry. You don't accuse without evidence. You don't drag command structures into personal disputes. And you never ever imply misconduct unless you're ready for every light in the room to turn on. Alexis didn't know that world. She knew leverage, optics, pressure. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, counting breaths until my pulse slowed. When it did, I reached for my phone and opened my notes app. I didn't write names. I didn't write accusations. I wrote facts. Trust established 5 years ago. Independent management. Monthly reporting. No direct withdrawals. No cash transfers. Then I wrote another line. Any allegation triggers review. That was the line she hadn't considered. I showered, changed, and went downstairs for a coffee I didn't finish. The lobby TV played a muted news segment about interest rates. No one paid attention. Everyone was busy with their own version of survival. At 9:03 p.m., another message came in. This one from Alexis. I talked to a lawyer today. No greeting, no explanation. He says I should have known more about mom and dad's money. I typed a response, then stopped. Deleted it. A third message followed. You always kept things from me. That one landed differently. Not because it was true, but because it was useful. I stood, walked back to my room, and locked the door. I sat at the desk, pulled the notebook from the glove compartment where I'd placed it earlier, and opened to the page I'd written by the ocean. One sentence, clear, unemotional. Silence is no longer protective. I added another line beneath it. Formal boundaries only. Alexis wasn't asking questions. She was building a narrative, one where she'd been excluded, overlooked, wronged. It was a narrative that played well with people who didn't ask for documentation. In my world, narratives collapse under paperwork. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls from the same unknown number. Rothman again. He was persistent. That told me more than the words he hadn't said yet. I didn't return the calls. Instead, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to the trust's CFO. Short, direct. Request full financial review. 5-year scope. Prepare documentation for potential third-party inquiry. I paused before hitting send, then added one more line. Include any communications involving Alexis Mercer. The reply came back within minutes. Acknowledged. Understood. Timeline pending. I closed the laptop. At 10:15, my phone rang again. This time I answered. Ms. Mercer, Rothman said, sounding relieved. I'm glad I caught you. I'm listening, I replied. Alexis has some concerns about transparency, he said. She feels she's been kept in the dark regarding assets she may have had a rightful claim to. You've left me a voicemail, I said. What specifically is she alleging? There was a pause, not long, just enough. At this point, he said, we're reviewing whether your role as trustee may have created a conflict. That was the moment. The exact moment the conversation crossed from annoyance into threat. My role as trustee, I said evenly, is fully documented and compliant with state and federal law. Any suggestion otherwise should be made in writing. I'm simply advising you of my client's position. And I'm advising you, I replied, to be careful with yours. Silence stretched between us. Is there anything else, I asked? No, he said, not at this time. The call ended. I sat there for a moment, phone still in my hand, then set it down face up on the desk. My reflection stared back from the dark screen, calm, focused, unmoved. Alexis had always believed that volume equaled power. That the loudest person in the room controlled the outcome. She'd just stepped into a system that didn't reward noise. Later that afternoon, I received an automated alert from the trust. Mortgage payment processed. Lease payment scheduled. Tuition draft pending. All routine. All reversible. I didn't touch anything yet. Instead, I drove to the base and checked in early. The gate guard nodded. The routine felt grounding, familiar. A reminder of who I was when things got complicated. In my office, I pulled up the ethics guidelines and scanned them the way I'd done countless times before deployments and promotions. No conflicts, no direct involvement, no violations. Everything was clean, which meant if Alexis wanted to make this public, it wouldn't end the way she expected. My phone buzzed once more. A text from Ethan. She's spiraling, it read. Talking about being betrayed, saying you've been hiding things. I stared at the message, then typed back. I'm not hiding anything. I'm done protecting lies. He responded almost immediately. I figured. I leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly. The decision I'd been circling was no longer theoretical. Alexis had made it real. She'd taken something personal and turned it adversarial. In my line of work, that changes the rules. I shut down the computer and picked up my cover. As I left the office, the late afternoon sun cut across the hallway sharp and unforgiving. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because my mind was racing, but because it was steady in a way that wouldn't let go. The kind of clarity that sits with you until you act on it. At 500, I was already dressed and out the door. The base was quiet in that early hour way that feels earned. A few headlights moved through the lot. Someone jogged past with headphones in, nodding without breaking stride. Routine is comforting when everything else starts to wobble. In the locker room, I changed into uniform and checked my reflection. Nothing dramatic. Same face I'd seen before. Inspections before deployments, before decisions that carried weight. If Alexis expected panic, she didn't understand how this part of my life worked. I logged into my workstation and pulled up the compliance checklist. Every officer knows it, not by heart, but by muscle memory. Financial disclosures, conflict of interest reviews, outside obligations. Everything that could be used against you if someone wanted to make noise. I went through it line by line. Clean. I'd built my life that way on purpose. You don't survive long in the Navy if you cut corners and hope no one notices. At 7:30, I met with legal assistance. Not for advice exactly, for confirmation. I'm anticipating a possible allegation, I told the lieutenant across the desk. Family-related, financial. I want to make sure my documentation is airtight. He nodded, already typing. We don't get involved in civilian disputes unless they intersect with your duties, he said. But if someone tries to imply misconduct, it becomes our lane. That's what I assumed. He skimmed the materials I'd brought. Trust structure, oversight reports, correspondence. He didn't linger. This is well managed, he said. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. My parents, I replied, and a very cautious lawyer. He gave a brief smile. That tracks. When I left his office, I didn't feel relieved. I felt confirmed. There's a difference. By late morning, I was back at my desk, drafting an email to my civilian attorney. Not emotional, not defensive, just factual. Possible hostile action from beneficiary. Request preparation for disclosure. Advise on protective steps. I sent it and closed the laptop. That was the thing about discipline. It doesn't escalate. It stabilizes. At noon, my phone buzzed again. Alexis, why are you ignoring me? I didn't respond. Another message followed. My lawyer says you could be in serious trouble. I set the phone face down. An hour later, an email arrived from Rothman. Longer this time. More formal. He requested documents, questioned timelines, used phrases like fiduciary duty and material omission. I read it once, then forwarded it to my attorney and the trust's CFO, no commentary. Then I stood up and went to lunch. That afternoon, I worked through my normal schedule. Meetings, reviews. A junior officer asked for feedback on a report. I gave it. Someone joked about my vacation drama. I smiled and changed the subject. At 1600, the CFO called. We've started the review, she said. I want to flag something early. I leaned back in my chair. Go on. There are discrepancies in how Alexis's business has been reporting expenses, she said. Nothing criminal on our end, but patterns. Patterns how? Consistent shortfalls covered by trust distributions that don't align with stated revenue. Also, some payments routed through third parties. I closed my eyes for a moment, not in surprise, but in recognition. Document everything I said. No conclusions yet. Of course. When the call ended, I sat still, hands folded, breathing slow. Alexis's narrative was already cracking under its own weight. She just didn't know it yet. That evening, I drove past her house again. Not to confront her, just to see it with new eyes. The lights were on in every room. Cars lined the driveway. Laughter spilled out through open windows. Another gathering, another performance. I parked farther away this time. From the sidewalk, the place looked solid, successful, untouchable. It always does before someone checks the foundation. My phone vibrated. "Ethan, can we talk?" I answered. "I'm outside," he said quietly. "Where?" "Down the street." I walked toward his voice. He stood near his car, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped. "She's convinced you're trying to ruin her," he said. "That you've been planning this." "I've been planning nothing," I replied. "I've been maintaining." That's what I told her. He hesitated. "She's talking about filing a complaint, about calling your command." I met his eyes. "If she does, it won't go the way she thinks." He nodded slowly. I figured. We stood there for a moment, the sound of music carrying down the block. "I pulled something out of the trash last night," he said. I didn't ask what. "The compass," he continued. "I didn't know what it was until you left." She didn't even look. I exhaled through my nose. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. But it felt wrong to leave it there. He handed it to me, wrapped carefully in a towel. I took it, the weight familiar in my palm. "It still works," he added. I checked. "Thank you," I said. He hesitated again. "Whatever you're doing, just do it clean." "That's the only way I know how." He nodded and walked back to his car without another word. I returned to mine, set the compass on the passenger seat, and drove back toward the base as the sky darkened. At a red light, my phone buzzed once more. Another email from Rothman. Sharper language this time, less courtesy. I didn't open it. Back in my quarters, I placed the compass in the drawer of my nightstand and sat at the desk. I pulled out the notebook and flipped to a fresh page. This time I wrote more than one line. Not accusations, not plans, just steps. Review, document, separate. Protect. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. Alexis thought betrayal looked like confrontation, like shouting and ultimatums. What she hadn't learned yet was how quiet things get right before the system starts moving. The next morning, I reviewed spreadsheets before coffee, the cursor blinking like it expected an argument. There wasn't one. Numbers don't care how loudly someone believes a story. They don't respond to tone or intent. They line up or they don't. By 06:15, I had 3 tabs open, and a fourth loading, each pulled from a different source, each telling the same quiet version of events. The boutique's monthly statements showed steady activity and steady loss. Not catastrophic, just enough to require help. Inventory reordered on predictable cycles. Vendor credits extended, then reversed. Marketing expenses that spiked right before holidays and never converted. Payroll met. Rent covered. The pattern was consistent enough to look intentional. I didn't draw conclusions. I highlighted cells. At 700, the CFO sent a secure folder. Inside were reconciliations going back 5 years. I opened them in order, resisting the urge to jump to the latest page. When you rush, you miss the tell. Year 1 looked like startup chaos. Year 2 stabilized, but only on paper. Year 3 introduced a new holding account, small, almost forgettable. Year 4 showed payments routed through a third party I didn't recognize. Year 5 tied it together with transfers that landed just ahead of deadlines. Always just in time. I sipped coffee that had gone cold and kept reading. There it was. The house down payment, disguised as a short-term bridge loan and repaid to itself. The car lease guaranteed through a vendor credit I'd approved without noticing the guarantor. School tuition invoiced to a family education fund that never existed outside the trust's accounting shorthand. Each line had a signature. Mine. Authorized. Proper. Each line also had a reason. A story. An explanation that made sense if you never asked why it happened again the next month. At 8:30, my attorney called. "I've reviewed Rothman's emails," she said. "He's fishing." "For what?" "For leverage," she replied. "He doesn't have evidence. He has a client who's upset and hoping pressure will force a concession." "And the review?" I asked. She paused. "You're fine. The trust is fine. But your sister's business is propped up." "Propped how?" "By you," she said gently. And by silence. I thanked her and ended the call. At 09:15, another message from Alexis came through. My lawyer says you could have explained things instead of shutting me out. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the payments calendar and scrolled. Mortgage cleared yesterday. Lease tomorrow. Tuition Friday. Insurance premiums on the 1st of the month. Each entry had a toggle. I didn't touch them yet. At mid-morning, I drove downtown and parked across from the boutique again. The windows were clean. The mannequins were dressed for a season that didn't quite exist. Inside, 2 employees chatted behind the counter, phones in hand. The register sat idle. I walked in. They looked up surprised. One of them recognized me. The other didn't. Hi, the first said. Alexis is not here. I'm not shopping, I replied. Just looking. They exchanged a glance. I walked the space slowly, noticing details I'd ignored before. The way price tags were handwritten instead of printed. The absence of backstock. The promotional flyers stacked near the door, advertising events that had already passed. Do you get many returns? I asked casually. The second employee shrugged. Sometimes. Depends. Depends on what? She hesitated. If the card clears. I nodded and thanked them, leaving without another word. Outside, my phone buzzed. Ethan again. She's meeting with her lawyer this afternoon, he wrote. She's convinced this ends with you apologizing. I typed back. I'm not apologizing for keeping records. A minute passed. She doesn't see it that way, he replied. She never has, I wrote. Back at the base, I sat through a routine briefing and took notes that had nothing to do with family. When it ended, I stayed behind to ask a question about a scheduling conflict. Normal life continued. That mattered. At 1400, the CFO called again. We found something else, she said. Small at first glance. Talk me through it. There's a charity account tied to the boutique. Fundraisers, donations. Mostly legitimate. But some expenses charged to it don't align with charitable activity. Like what? Personal travel, she said. Event dinners without events. And a consulting fee paid to an LLC with no services rendered. I closed my eyes, counting to 3. Document, I said. No assumptions. Already doing it. When the call ended, I sat back and stared at the wall. Not angry, focused. This wasn't a moral spiral. It was a logistical one. Alexis had built her life on a misunderstanding. That support meant endorsement. That quiet meant approval. That access meant ownership. At 16:30, Rothman emailed again, shorter, sharper. He requested a meeting to discuss equitable distribution. I forwarded it again without comment. By evening, the sky had shifted into that muted blue that makes everything feel suspended. I drove past Alexis's house one more time. No party tonight, just lights in the kitchen and a single car in the driveway. I didn't stop. At home, I placed the compass on the desk and turned it slowly. The needle settled without hesitation. North as promised. It didn't wobble. It didn't argue. It just pointed. I opened the notebook and reviewed what I'd written the night before. Then I added 2 words beneath the list. End dependency. I closed the notebook and slid it into the drawer. At 9:02 p.m., my phone rang. Alexis's name lit the screen. I let it ring. A voicemail followed. You're doing this to punish me, she said, voice tight. You think you're better than me because you wear a uniform. You always have. I listened once, then deleted it. The system doesn't move all at once. It starts with small adjustments that look harmless to people who aren't paying attention. It favors documentation over drama and patience over volume. I turned off the light, set the alarm, and lay back, already measuring distances and timing the way I always did when something had to be done right. I set the compass back in the drawer and slid it closed, then picked up my phone and scrolled past the missed calls until I found Ethan's number again. I didn't call right away. I drove. There's a stretch of road along the water where traffic thins and the horizon stays honest. I parked, cut the engine, and let the silence do its work. When I finally dialed, he answered on the second ring. I figured you might, he said. Are you somewhere you can talk? I asked. Yes, he replied. Outside. We didn't waste time on pleasantries. He didn't ask how I was holding up. I didn't ask how Alexis was spinning it at home. We both knew those answers changed hourly. She thinks this is a power move, he said. That if she pushes hard enough, you'll fold. I don't fold, I said. I document. He gave a quiet laugh, not amused, relieved. She doesn't understand that, he said. She thinks loud wins. I leaned back against the seat and watched a boat cut across the water, slow and steady. She pulled bank statements this morning, he continued. started circling things, asked me why the numbers didn't line up. What did you tell her? That I didn't know, he said. Because I didn't. Not the details, just the pattern. I closed my eyes briefly. What pattern? That every time things got tight, something invisible fixed it, he said. And every time I asked where the help came from, she said it was handled. I pictured the boutique again. The displays, the idle register, the confidence that had always felt rehearsed. I need to be clear with you, I said. This isn't personal. It's procedural. I know, he replied. That's why I'm calling. There was a pause, wind over the phone, distant traffic. I pulled the kids' education statements last night, he said. Not because of you, because something felt off. And they've been billed correctly, he said. But the payments didn't come from where I thought they did. I exhaled slowly. They came from the trust. Yes, he said, but routed through something else first. That's consistent with what we're seeing, I replied. It doesn't change the kids' status. I know, he said quickly. That's not why I'm calling. I waited. I don't want them learning that this is how you live, he said, depending on things you didn't earn and calling it success. That was the first time his voice cracked. I grew up watching my parents argue about money, he added. I promised myself I wouldn't do that to them. I didn't realize I was letting something worse happen. You weren't the one making decisions, I said. But you can help now. I want to, he replied. Tell me what that looks like. I didn't hesitate. It looks like honesty. And boundaries. We talked for 20 minutes. Not about strategy, about facts. What he'd seen, what he'd signed, what he hadn't. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't defend himself. He asked questions and wrote answers down. Before we hung up, he said one more thing. I took the compass out of the trash because it didn't belong there, he said. But also because I knew she wouldn't care. I care, I replied. I know, he said. That's why I trust you. The call ended without promises, just alignment. The next morning, I met with my attorney again. This time, I brought notes from the call. Not names, not judgments, just timelines and transactions Ethan had confirmed. She reviewed them quietly. He's an important witness, she said. Not against her, for the truth. I'm not trying to punish anyone, I replied. I'm trying to stop enabling. That distinction matters, she said. Especially later. By noon, the CFO sent another update. The third-party account had been used to float expenses during months when the boutique's revenue dipped below payroll. It was technically legal, but misleading. The charity account showed mixed use that would require correction. I forwarded the update to my attorney and closed the file. At 1400, Ethan texted again. She's angry, he wrote. Not at you. At the situation. That was new. She says you've changed, he added. I typed back. I stopped covering gaps. A few minutes later, another message. She wants to meet. All of us. I stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down. Meetings create performance. Performance muddies facts. Instead, I drove to the base and completed the last of my obligations for the week. Signatures, reviews. A conversation with my commanding officer about an upcoming schedule change. Normal, grounding. On the way out, I passed a junior officer struggling with a decision he didn't want to make. I listened, asked questions, didn't give advice he hadn't earned. The irony wasn't lost on me. That evening, Ethan came by my place, not Alexis's, mine. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, holding a folder. He looked like someone stepping into unfamiliar terrain. I printed everything I could find, he said. Invoices, emails, statements. I didn't know what mattered, so I brought it all. That's perfect, I replied, taking the folder. Truth doesn't mind clutter. We sat at the table and sorted documents without commentary. When we finished, the picture was clearer than either of us had wanted. She still thinks this ends with an apology, he said quietly. It ends with accuracy, I replied. What happens after that is her choice. He nodded, rubbing his hands together. I'll stand by the kids, no matter what. That's what matters, I said. When he left, the apartment felt larger, quieter. I filed the documents, labeled the folder, and placed it beside the notebook in the drawer. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Later, as I washed dishes, my phone buzzed once more. A short message from Alexis. I don't understand why you're doing this. I read it, then set the phone down without replying. Understanding comes after facts, not before. I turned off the kitchen light and stood for a moment in the quiet, aware that something essential had shifted, not with noise or confrontation, but with one person deciding to stop pretending the imbalance was harmless. I dried my hands, turned off the kitchen light, and stood there a moment longer than necessary, listening to the apartment settle like it always did when nothing else was demanding attention. In the morning, I didn't wake early out of anxiety. I woke early because the list was ready. By 06:10, I was at the desk with coffee that actually stayed hot this time. I opened the payments calendar and reviewed it one last time. Mortgage, lease, tuition, insurance. Marketing reimbursements routed through accounts that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Each item had been approved months ago. Each item could be paused with a single action provided it was done correctly. I didn't pause everything. That would have looked emotional, reactionary. Instead, I followed the structure my attorney had outlined. I separated essential obligations from discretionary support. I preserved anything tied directly to the children. I halted business subsidies that had no contractual requirement to continue. No announcements, no messages, no warnings, just clean execution. At 07:25, I toggled the first payment. The system confirmed the change and logged my credentials. Time-stamped, documented. I took a sip of coffee and moved to the next line. By 07:40, the adjustments were complete. I didn't feel relief. I felt alignment. At 08:12, my phone rang. Alexis. I let it ring. At 08:14, another call. Then a text. What did you do? I set the phone face down and went to shower. By the time I finished getting dressed, there were 6 missed calls and a voicemail. I listened to it while tying my shoes. Something's wrong with the accounts, she said, breathless. The bank says a payment didn't go through. This better be a mistake. No accusation yet, just disbelief. I didn't respond. At 900, the boutique's manager emailed me by mistake. She meant to write Alexis. Subject urgent. Payroll issue. I forwarded it to the CFO without comment. At 09:35, Ethan called. She's panicking, he said quietly. The car lease flagged. The landlord called about rent. She thinks it's a glitch. It's not, I replied. She wants to talk to you. I'm available by email, I said. For documentation. He exhaled. She's not built for this kind of silence. I know, I said. That's why it works. At mid-morning, I went to the base and handled the rest of my scheduled work. I signed what needed signing. I answered questions that deserved answers. I didn't check my phone until lunch. When I did, there were 12 new messages. Most were variations of the same theme. Confusion turning into anger. Anger turning into certainty. You're doing this on purpose. You think you can control me. You don't get to decide my life. The last one almost made me smile. I replied once, I'm no longer funding your business. All changes are documented. Any questions can go through counsel. Nothing else. At 13:17, Rothman emailed. His tone had shifted. Less confident. More cautious. He requested clarification on the sudden change in support. He implied retaliation. My attorney replied within the hour. Support was discretionary. Changes were lawful. Documentation attached. At 14:40, the boutique's social media went quiet. No stories, no posts, no cheerful updates. At 15:05, Ethan texted again. She's calling everyone, friends, partners, anyone who might step in. Anyone stepping in should review the books first, I wrote back. He didn't reply. That evening, I drove past the boutique without stopping. The lights were on. But only one employee remained. The register drawer sat open and empty. A cardboard box leaned against the counter, half filled with unsold inventory. I parked across the street and watched for a minute, then pulled away. At home, I reheated leftovers and ate standing up. I didn't sit because sitting invites reflection, and reflection wasn't necessary. Everything that needed to happen had already been set in motion. My phone buzzed again, a new voicemail from Alexis. You can't just cut me off, she said, voice sharp now. You owe me. Mom and Dad would never have done this. I listened to the end. You think wearing that uniform makes you superior? She continued. But you don't even understand how the real world works. I deleted the message. The real world is paperwork and consequences. It's contracts and timelines and the absence of rescue when rescue was never guaranteed. At 20:30, Ethan came by again. This time, he didn't sit. She's crying, he said. Not because of the money, because people are saying no. That's new for her, I replied. She's furious at you. I expected that. She says you humiliated her. I nodded once. I stopped protecting a false image. He looked down at the floor, then back up. The landlord gave notice. Not eviction, just a warning. That's standard, I said. He'll negotiate if the numbers support it. They don't, Ethan said quietly. We stood in silence for a moment. She asked me whose side I'm on, he added. And I told her I'm on the kids' side. I felt something ease in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. After he left, I took out the notebook and reviewed the steps I'd written days ago. Review, document, separate, protect. Each one had been executed. I added one more line at the bottom. Do not intervene. At 22:10, a final message from Alexis came through. You think this makes you powerful? I set the phone down and didn't answer. Power wasn't the goal. Accuracy was. Stability. The end of a cycle that had been quietly draining everyone involved. I turned off the lights and went to bed. Not with satisfaction, but with the calm that comes from finally stepping out of a role you were never meant to play. The knock came just after sunrise, sharp enough to carry through the thin walls, timed with the first call of the base shuttle outside. I didn't rush to answer it. I finished tying my boots, checked the mirror once, then opened the door. Alexis stood there, without makeup, hair pulled back too tight. Phone clenched in her hand like evidence. She looked past me immediately, scanning the apartment the way she always did. Measuring square footage furniture, anything that could be judged. So this is where you've been hiding, she said. I live here, I replied. Hiding requires effort. She stepped inside without waiting to be invited. Her eyes landed on the framed service photo on the wall. Navy dress whites, promotion ceremony. The flag behind me was folded with regulation precision. You really think that uniform scares people, she said. It doesn't, I answered. It just reminds them I'm accountable. She laughed, but it didn't land. You shut everything down without warning. I changed what I was legally allowed to change, I said. That's not a shutdown. That's a boundary. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, face tightening. Another message she didn't want. They froze the merchant account, she said. My vendors are calling. Employees are asking questions. Then answer them, I said. You did this to embarrass me. No, I said evenly. You embarrassed yourself when the numbers couldn't support the story. She moved closer, lowering her voice. You've always hated that I was better with people. I never hated that, I said. I hated cleaning up after it. That stopped her for a moment. You could fix this, she said. You know that, right? I know exactly what it would take, I replied. And I'm not doing it. Her jaw tightened. Mom would be furious with you. I don't use the dead to win arguments, I said. She scoffed. You always think you're above everyone. I think I'm done, I corrected. Her phone buzzed again. This time she didn't check it. She already knew what it said. They're saying the lease might be terminated, she snapped. They're saying I misrepresented income. Because you did, I said. She stared at me like she'd never heard the word before. I built that place, she said, from nothing. You named it, I replied. That's not the same thing. She turned toward this door, then stopped. You think this makes you righteous? I think it makes me honest, I said. She left without another word, heels clicking down the hallway like punctuation. By noon, the calls started hitting people who weren't me, her friends, her so-called partners, anyone whose name had ever appeared next to hers on a post or press release. No one answered. At 13:15, my attorney forwarded an update. The boutique's landlord had requested financial disclosures. The bank wanted clarification on recent transactions. The accountant had stopped returning her messages. At 13:40, the school called Ethan, not about tuition, about behavior. Alexis had shown up unannounced and demanded access to the kids during class hours. The front office refused. Security was involved. That part hit harder than the rest. At 1500, I received an email from the board of a local charity. Polite, careful. They asked if I was still affiliated with Alexis's public commitments. I replied with one sentence. I am not. By late afternoon, the story had changed. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about missing funds, about payroll discrepancies, about how a business that claimed growth couldn't explain its cash flow. The lies didn't collapse dramatically. They thinned. They lost tension. They stopped convincing people who knew how to read past presentation slides. At 17:18, Ethan called again. She's blaming you for everything he said. But she's also asking if you'll cover next month's rent. No, I replied. She said the kids deserve stability. They do, I said, which is why they won't be used as leverage. He was quiet for a moment. I'm documenting everything now. That's wise, I said. She doesn't know I am. Even better. That evening, I sat at the desk and reviewed my service schedule for the next quarter. Deployment window, training rotations, performance review. Nothing on that list involved Alexis. My phone buzzed again. A new voicemail. Her voice was different this time. Tighter. Controlled. "You think this is over," she said. "It's not." "I'm talking to someone." I listened twice, then archived it. Threats need follow-through to matter. At 20:30, the first article went live. Not about me, about the boutique. Local retail brand faces scrutiny over financial irregularities. No names quoted, no conclusions drawn, just questions. By 2011, her social media comments were disabled. By 2020, the Tesla was gone. I knew because she texted me a photo of the empty driveway. They took it. "Happy now," I didn't respond. Happiness had nothing to do with it. I turned in early, not because I was tired, but because the day had finally stopped asking things of me. The next morning, I woke to silence. No missed calls, no texts, no messages demanding rescue. At 900, I received one email from a number I didn't recognize. It was short. "I didn't think you'd actually let me fall." I read it once, then closed the laptop. Letting someone fall isn't cruelty, it's refusal to lie. I put on my cover and headed out, stepping into the day without checking my phone again, aware that whatever noise followed would have to exist without my participation. I didn't answer the email. I left my phone on the counter and walked out the door before the coffee finished brewing, letting it burn because routine mattered more than comfort that morning. At the base, the day moved the way it always did. Briefings stayed on schedule. No one asked about my sister. No one needed to. The Navy has a way of stripping life down to function. If something isn't mission critical, it waits. By mid-morning, I'd almost forgotten the message existed. Almost. At 10:37, Ethan called again. His voice sounded flatter than usual, like someone who'd stopped being surprised. "She moved out," he said. Where I asked. "A short-term rental. Furnished. Weekly rate." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "And the kids? With me. They're fine. Confused, but fine." "That matters," I said. "She showed up last night," he continued. Wanted to explain. Wanted them to hear her side. And I didn't let her in. I closed my eyes briefly. "Thank you." She kept saying she just needed time, he added. That everything would stabilize if people would stop panicking. "Stability doesn't come from denial," I said. "No," he agreed. "It comes from consistency, which she doesn't have right now." After the call, I sat in my car for a moment before heading back inside. I watched a junior officer jog across the lot, laughing into his phone, completely unburdened by whatever drama waited for him off base. I envied him for exactly 3 seconds. Then I let it go. At lunch, my attorney sent another update. The charity board had opened a review. The bank had requested additional documentation. Nothing dramatic, just systems doing what systems do when fed bad data. At 14:30, the boutique officially closed for renovations. At 1600, her business license was flagged. At 1745, I received a notification that a storage unit in her name had been defaulted. Payment missed. Lock scheduled. That one surprised me. I forwarded the notice to Ethan. "Did you know about this?" He replied a few minutes later. "She moved everything out weeks ago. Clothes, decor." Boxes, she said, were sentimental. "Anything important left?" I asked. "Just props," he wrote back. Things she liked being seen with. That tracked. That evening, I cooked for the first time in days. Nothing fancy. Chicken, rice, vegetables that hadn't come from a takeout container. I ate slowly at the table phone face down. Halfway through, a knock came at the door. I knew who it was before I stood up. Alexis looked smaller without the heels. The jacket she wore wasn't new. The confidence that usually preceded her had been replaced by something closer to calculation. "I won't take long," she said. "You should," I replied. "You came all this way." She stepped inside cautiously, this time, eyes avoiding the walls, the photos, anything that reminded her this space didn't revolve around her. "They're saying the charity board wants statements," she said. "They're asking questions." "Then answer them," I said. "You know I didn't steal," she snapped. "I know you redirected," I said. "That's not better." She clenched her jaw. "You always need things labeled." "I need them accurate." She took a breath. "I lost everything." "You lost access," I corrected. "There's a difference." She laughed brittle. "You really don't feel bad at all." "I feel responsible," I said. "That's not the same thing." For what she demanded. For letting this go on as long as it did. That caught her off guard. "You think this is your fault now?" she scoffed. I think I confused support with silence, I replied. And silence let you believe nothing had limits. She looked away. I needed you. You needed an audience, I said. I gave you a safety net. She sat down heavily on the edge of the couch. I don't know how to do this without you. That's the problem, I said quietly. Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. She'd learned when crying stopped working. They won't return my calls, she said. Friends, sponsors, people who used to praise me. They were never yours, I said. They were attached to an image. What about you? She asked. Aren't you attached? I shook my head. I'm attached to the kids, to truth, to not lying to myself anymore. She swallowed. I can change. I believe you think that, I said. She stood abruptly. So that's it. You cut me off and walk away like I never mattered. No, I said. I stopped paying. I didn't stop caring. She stared at me, searching for something to argue with. You always hide behind that uniform, she said finally. I smiled faintly. It's not hiding. It's accountability you can't negotiate with. She left without another word. After she was gone, I sat on the floor longer than I meant to, back against the couch, listening to the apartment breathe around me. I didn't feel victory. I felt space. At 2300, Ethan texted. Kids asked why mom doesn't come over anymore. What did you say? I asked. That sometimes adults have to fix things before they can show up properly. I nodded to no one. The next morning, I woke early again, but not because something was pressing. I checked my phone once. No messages from her. Instead, a notification from the charity board. We appreciate your clarification. Further review ongoing. I put the phone down and laced my boots, the habit grounding me the way it always had. Outside, the air was cool and clear, the kind that sharpens your thoughts, whether you want it to or not. Whatever came next would have to come without shortcuts, without cover, without someone else quietly absorbing the impact. And for the first time in years, that felt like the only honest option left. I woke before the alarm and reached for my phone out of habit, then stopped halfway and left it where it was. The silence felt earned. Outside, the city was already moving. Garbage trucks, early commuters, the low hum of a place that didn't care about anyone's personal collapse. I dressed, checked my cover once, and left without rushing. At the base, my commanding officer stopped me in the corridor. You good? He asked casually, the way people do, when they already know something's off, but don't need details. Yes, sir, I said. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a performance. By mid-morning, the charity review concluded. No press release, no public apology tour. Just a quiet restructuring and a note of appreciation for my cooperation. The system corrected itself the way systems do when you stop interfering. At 11:40, Ethan sent a photo. The kids at the kitchen table, backpacks open, homework spread out. Normal, ordinary, stable. They're asking about you, he added. When they can visit. Anytime, I wrote back. When it works for you. That afternoon, I finally answered the email Alexis had sent days ago. One sentence. I didn't let you fall. I stopped holding you up. I didn't wait for a reply. At 1600, I stopped by the storage unit office on my way home. Not hers. Mine. Inside were boxes I hadn't opened in years. Letters. Old photos. Things that mattered, but didn't photograph well. I took one box labeled family and carried it back to the car. That night, Ethan brought the kids over for dinner. They walked in cautiously, like guests in a place they weren't sure they were allowed to belong yet. I didn't make a speech. I handed them plates. We ate spaghetti and talked about school, about a science project that involved vinegar, about a book report no one wanted to write. No one mentioned their mother. After dinner, the younger one wandered toward the service photo on the wall. That's you, she asked. Yes, I said. You look serious. I had to be. Are you still? She asked. I thought about it. Sometimes. She nodded, satisfied with that answer. When they left, the apartment felt different. Not empty. Just quieter, in a way that didn't ache. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Alexis didn't call, didn't show up, didn't send messages designed to pull me back into orbit. What she did do was file paperwork. Counseling intake forms. Employment applications. Court-required disclosures. I found out through Ethan, who relayed facts without commentary. She's working retail now, he said one evening. Part-time. Nothing glamorous. Good, I replied. She asked if you'd cover the kids' camp fees. No, I said calmly. I'll pay directly to the program. He paused. That matters to you. It does, I said. It should. At the 1-month mark, she sent a message that wasn't accusatory. I'm trying it, Red. I stared at it for a long moment, then replied. So am I. That was all. At 6 weeks, she showed up at a school event and stayed in the back. No speeches, no attempts to reclaim attention. The kids noticed. So did Ethan. She didn't make it about herself, he said later. That's new. Change isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just stops repeating old patterns. At 2 months, she asked to meet. I agreed on neutral ground. We sat across from each other at a cafe she used to dismiss as unbranded. No one recognized her. No one cared. She looked tired, not broken, just real. I wanted to apologize, she said, not for the money, for the entitlement. I waited. I don't know who I am without people reacting to me, she admitted. That's something you'll have to figure out, I said. She nodded. I know you won't help me anymore. I won't enable you, I corrected. Those aren't the same. She absorbed that. I start therapy next week, she said. Court mandated. Stick with it, I said. She hesitated. Do you hate me? No, I replied honestly. I hate the role I played. She looked relieved and disappointed at the same time. When we stood to leave, she didn't reach for me. She didn't ask for anything. That mattered. Later that night, I sat at my desk and opened this family box. Inside was an old birthday card she'd given me years ago. Before the boutique, before the image. It read, "You always show up. I hope I do too." I folded it and put it back. Some promises take longer than others. The next morning, I ran along the water before sunrise, the cold air sharp against my lungs. With each step, the weight I'd been carrying for years felt lighter. Not because it disappeared, but because it was finally in the right place. I hadn't won anything. I hadn't destroyed her. I'd drawn a line and refused to cross it again. And in that space, something steadier than revenge had taken hold. Not forgiveness, not yet, but truth. And that was enough to stand on. Sometimes family revenge stories aren't about winning. They're about stopping the slow loss of yourself. Sometimes the bravest move in family drama is choosing truth over loyalty and boundaries over guilt. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the quiet fixer, the one expected to carry everyone else, you're not alone. These family revenge stories exist because so many people live them in silence. If you want more real grounded stories about family betrayal, boundaries, and quiet strength, especially from women who've had to choose themselves, subscribe to the channel. New stories every week, told honestly, without exaggeration, and rooted in real life. Thanks for listening.